I stood there in my Sunday best, my weathered hands shaking as I clutched the small velvet box containing the pearl earrings that had belonged to my mother, the ones I'd promised to give my only daughter's child on her wedding day. "What do you mean it was yesterday?" The words came out barely above a whisper, my throat closing up like I was choking on glass. My own granddaughter, little Sarah, who I'd rocked to sleep through countless fevers, had gotten married at Willow Creek Manor, my family's historic property, without even telling me. My son-in-law Raymond had the audacity to look annoyed, as if I was inconveniencing him by showing up on their doorstep on Sunday morning. "Look, Elaine, it was a small ceremony, very last minute, just immediate family, immediate family." The words echoed in my head like a cruel joke as I stood on the porch where I'd watched Sarah take her first steps. Behind Raymond, I could see the dining room table covered with wrapped gifts and leftover cake. The smell of flowers still hung in the air, mixed with champagne and perfume. Someone's heels had been kicked off by the staircase. Through the large bay window, I could see my daughter Melissa scrolling through her phone, probably looking at wedding photos that I wasn't in. Would I even exist in the family album now? I noticed a photographer's business card on the entry table, alongside a receipt showing a $3,500 payment. They had money for that but couldn't spare a phone call to the woman who'd paid for Sarah's college tuition. "It wasn't our decision," Raymond continued, not quite meeting my eyes. "Sarah and Tyler wanted to keep it intimate. You know how these young couples are nowadays." I didn't miss the way his gaze flickered toward the property line where Willow Creek Manor stood in the distance, its white columns gleaming in the morning sun, the very place I'd inherited from my parents, the place I still legally owned, despite their constant attempts to make me sign it over. That's when I knew. This wasn't about an intimate ceremony. This was about making sure the old lady wouldn't make a scene about them using her property without permission. Well, they had no idea who they were dealing with. They thought they could erase me from family history and steal what was mine. I may be 67, but I was about to show them exactly who owned Willow Creek Manor, and it wasn't just the property deed I was talking about. I need to go back to explain how it all started, how my beautiful relationship with my daughter and granddaughter crumbled like the historic stone wall that lines the east side of Willow Creek Manor. The property has been my family since 1897, passed down through the women in our line. My great-grandmother survived the loss of her husband in the Spanish flu epidemic and kept the estate running. My grandmother expanded it during the Great Depression by turning it into a boarding house for respectable ladies. My mother transformed it into one of the first wedding venues in Oak Ridge County back in the 1960s. And me, I've been its caretaker for the past 32 years, since Mother passed from breast cancer in 1993. I remember her pulling me close in her hospital bed, her fingers like brittle twigs against my cheek as she whispered, "The land knows who loves it, Elaine. Remember that. Melissa was my only child, born when I was 30, after doctors told me I likely couldn't conceive. My miracle baby." I still remember the feeling of her tiny hand wrapped around my finger, how the world suddenly seemed to have purpose. Her father, Richard, worked as an accountant and was as dependable as the sunrise until he wasn't leaving us for his secretary when Melissa was 14. The pain of his betrayal was like swallowing broken glass, but I threw myself into two things: raising Melissa and preserving Willow Creek Manor. We lived in the caretaker's cottage on the property, a charming 3-bedroom stone house that sat about 100 yards from the main manor house. On weekends, I'd teach Melissa how to arrange flowers for the ceremonies, how to polish the antique silver that we rented out for receptions, how to treat the historic hardwood floors to keep them gleaming. "One day, sweetheart," I'd tell her, "all of this will be yours, and then Sarah's after you. We keep it in the family. That's what makes it special." Melissa met Raymond during her sophomore year at college. I paid her tuition in full, $22,500 per year at the state university, because I wanted her to start adulthood without debt. Raymond was studying business administration and had big ideas and an even bigger personality. The first time she brought him to Willow Creek, I noticed how his eyes widened at the main house, how he walked the grounds asking questions about acreage and property taxes. Instead of admiring the 200-year-old oak tree, where generations of brides had taken photos, but Melissa looked at him like he hung the moon, so I bit my tongue. They married right after graduation in 2002, a beautiful June ceremony on the lawn, I gave them the caretaker's cottage to live in while I moved into an apartment above the carriage house. You need space to start your family, I insisted, ignoring the twinge I felt at leaving the home where I'd raised my daughter. Sarah came along a year later, and she was the light of my world from her first breath, while Melissa went back to work as a paralegal and Raymond started his real estate business. I cared for Sarah 3 days a week. We had a special bond from the beginning, this tiny person with Melissa's eyes and my mother's determined chin. I taught her the names of all the flowers in the gardens, let her help me polish the brass doorknobs in the manor when she was old enough, and told her stories about the generations of strong women who had protected this place. When she was 8, I started letting her greet the brides who came to tour the venue. She'd curtsy in her little dresses and say, "Welcome to Willow Creek Manor. May your love be as everlasting as our oak tree." The brides always melted, often slipping her a $5 bill, which she saved in a special box for manor improvements. The problems started when Sarah was about 10, around 2013. Raymond's real estate business had taken off, and suddenly the caretaker's cottage wasn't good enough anymore. "We need more space," Melissa told me over Sunday dinner. "Sarah needs her own bathroom, and Raymond needs a home." Office, I nodded, assuming they'd be looking at houses in town. Then Raymond cleared his throat and said, "We've been thinking about the manor house. It's just sitting there empty most of the time, except for events. It's practical. Plus, having us live on site would help with security." The fork froze halfway to my mouth. The manor house wasn't just a building, it was a historical treasure, filled with antiques and family heirlooms. Each room had been carefully preserved and was part of the experience that couples paid for when they booked weddings there. "The manor isn't a residence anymore," I explained carefully. "It's set up for events. The kitchen isn't even modern." Raymond's face tightened in that way I'd come to recognize when he didn't get what he wanted. "We could renovate," he said. "Think about it, Elaine. That place could be spectacular as a modern home. We could move the wedding business to the gardens only." I felt my blood pressure rising. "The business involves the house tours, the bridal suite, the family dining room for rehearsal dinners," I said. "It's not just about the gardens." Melissa jumped in, her voice taking on that placating tone she'd developed for navigating between her husband and her mother. "Mom, maybe we could work something out. A partial renovation. We could section off part of the house for us and leave the rest for the business." I looked from my daughter to my son-in-law, trying to understand how they could so casually suggest dismantling what 5 generations of women had built. "The manor stays as it is," I said firmly. "That's non-negotiable. But I'll help you look for a nice house nearby." The tension around the table was thick enough to cut with the antique butter knife we were using. Sarah, who had been quietly listening, suddenly piped up, "I like the carriage house apartment where Grandma lives. It's cozy." Raymond's response came quick and sharp. "Adults are talking, Sarah." I saw her shrink in her chair, and something in me hardened. That night was the first time I updated my will with my attorney, Judith Winters. "Make it crystal clear," I told her. "Willow Creek Manor passes directly to Sarah when she turns 30, with a trust managing it. Until then, if something happens to me, the business stays intact." When I told Melissa about my decision the following week, I expected her to understand. Instead, she was furious. "So you're skipping me completely? After all the weekends I helped with weddings?" Growing up, the hurt in her voice was genuine, but so was mine when I replied, "You married a man who wants to tear out the heart of this place and turn it into a McMansion. What choice do I have?" That was the first major crack in our relationship, a fissure that would only widen over the years. Raymond began making comments when they visited. "This place is a money pit, Elaine. You should sell while the market's hot. Or do you know how much property tax you could save if you transferred ownership now?" Each suggestion came with a spreadsheet or a printout of tax codes. By the time Sarah was 12, their visits had decreased to major holidays and the occasional Sunday dinner. But Sarah and I maintained our connection. She'd ride her bike over after school sometimes, and I'd teach her how to manage the business books or how to deal with difficult clients. "The secret," I'd tell her, as we sat in my little office overlooking the rose garden, "is to listen to what they're really worried about." Most angry brides aren't mad about the flowers or the chair covers. They're scared their day won't be perfect. Sarah would nod solemnly, her eyes wise beyond her years. When she turned 16 in 2019, I gave her a set of keys to the manor. You're old enough to start learning everything, I told her. This will be yours someday. She hugged me so tight I could feel her heart beating against mine. The real trouble began in late 2022, when Sarah started dating Tyler Whitman. He was from one of the wealthiest families in Oak Ridge County, the son of a hospital administrator and a judge. Good-looking boy with perfect teeth and a Harvard acceptance letter already in hand. Raymond and Melissa were over the moon about the relationship. Suddenly our Sunday dinners resumed, with the Whitmans often joining us. I watched as Raymond laughed too loudly at Judge Whitman's jokes, and Melissa touched Mrs. Whitman's arm like they were old friends when they'd just met. The Whitmans were old money, the kind that had summer homes and country club memberships, the kind that looked at Willow Creek Manor, not as a historical treasure but as a quaint venue for their charity events. I tried to be welcoming for Sarah's sake. Tyler seemed nice enough, if a bit entitled. He would put his arm around Sarah's shoulders, steering her movements in a way that made me uneasy, but she seemed happy. He's going to be a doctor, she told me proudly one afternoon as we walked the grounds. Probably a surgeon like his uncle, I nodded, wondering if she was really impressed by that or if she was parroting what she'd heard from her parents. And what about your plans for college? I asked carefully. Sarah had always talked about studying business and hospitality management to take over Willow Creek properly one day. She looked down at her shoes, scuffing one against the gravel path. I might take a gap year, she said. Tyler thinks it would be good for us to have the same graduation date. Eventually, since he's a year ahead of me, alarm bells rang in my head, but I kept my voice neutral. That's a big decision. Have you told your parents? She nodded quickly. They think it's practical. Dad says the wedding industry is changing anyway, with more people doing micro-weddings and elopements. He thinks I should consider other career options. The casual way she dismissed her dreams made my heart ache. This place has weathered world wars, depressions, and social changes. I reminded her, every generation adapts it to the times while keeping its heart intact. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I know, Grandma, but maybe it's time for bigger changes. Over the next year, I watched Sarah change. The confident girl who could handle bridezillas and navigate family dynamics at receptions became quiet, always checking her phone to answer Tyler's texts immediately. She stopped coming by after school, always busy with activities that would look good on college. Applications she had supposedly postponed. When she did visit, she seemed distracted, her eyes darting to the time every few minutes. Sorry, Grandma, I can't stay long. Tyler's picking me up. One day in spring 2023, I noticed a faint bruise on her wrist. When I asked about it, she tugged her sleeve down. Just bumped it on the door at Tyler's house, she said, but she wouldn't look at me. I made a mental note to talk to Melissa about it, but when I called her that evening, she brushed me off. Mom, they're teenagers, they're passionate. Don't make something out of nothing. By summer, I was seeing less and less of Sarah. Her graduation came and went, a beautiful ceremony where I sat 3 rows behind the Whitmans, who had somehow scored front row seats despite alphabetical order supposedly determining placement. At the party afterward, Sarah barely had time to hug me before Tyler whisked her away to take photos with his family. I overheard Raymond telling someone, she's taking a year off, then probably Brown or Yale. The Whitmans have connections. Not a word about Willow Creek or the legacy waiting for her. I left early, the cake tasting like sawdust in my mouth. That fall, things escalated. I received a certified letter from Raymond's law firm, not even his own attorney, but one I recognized as representing commercial real estate developers. The letter outlined a proposal for succession planning for Willow Creek Manor, suggesting I transfer ownership to a family trust immediately, with Raymond as trustee. They cited my age 67 and concerns about cognitive decision-making as reasons. There was a sticky note attached in Raymond's handwriting, just looking out for the family's interests. We can discuss Sunday. I was so angry I couldn't see straight. I called Judith immediately and had her draft a response, making it clear that I was of sound mind, in excellent health. According to my last physical on September 12, I included the doctor's contact information, and that my succession plans were already legally established. Sunday dinner that week was tense. I arrived early, as was my habit, bringing a blueberry cobbler, Sarah's favorite. The house was strangely quiet, with only Melissa in the kitchen. Where's Sarah? I asked, setting down my dish. Melissa barely looked up from the pot she was stirring. Out with Tyler. They're telling his extended family about their engagement. The spoon I'd been holding clattered to the floor. Engagement, she's barely 18. Melissa's face hardened in a way that reminded me so much of Raymond. They're in love, Mom. The Whitmans are thrilled. They're talking about a June wedding next year at their country club. My head was spinning, but Sarah always said she wanted to be married under the oak tree at Willow Creek, like all the women in our family. Raymond walked in then, a glass of whiskey in hand, though it was only 4:30 in the afternoon. Ah, Elaine, good timing. Did Melissa tell you the news? He was smiling, but it didn't reach his eyes. I nodded, still too shocked to form words. Tyler's a good match, Raymond continued. His father is already talking about getting him into the hospital administration track after medical school. Fast-tracked career. He took a sip of his drink. By the way, did you get our letter? I thought it might be easier to discuss in person. I found my voice then. You mean the letter, suggesting I'm not competent to manage my own property? The one questioning my mental capacity. Melissa had the grace to look embarrassed, but Raymond just shrugged. It's standard language. Look, Elaine, you're not getting any younger. The manor needs significant upgrades to stay competitive in today's market. A family trust makes sense. I set down my purse, carefully placed my car keys on the counter, and looked him straight in the eye. Let me be very clear. Willow Creek Manor is not for sale, not for transfer, and not up for discussion. My will is ironclad. Any further attempts to pressure me will result in me banning you from the property entirely. Raymond's face flushed red. You can't do that. We live here. I smiled thinly. You live in a house on my property, with a lease agreement that I can terminate with 90 days' notice. Would you like me to exercise that option? The room went silent. I turned to Melissa, hoping to see some recognition of how inappropriate this all was, but she was staring at the floor. I'd like to speak to Sarah, I said finally. When will she be home? Raymond answered instead. She's staying at the Whitmans tonight. College applications and wedding planning. You know how it is. I left without eating dinner, my appetite gone. On the drive back to my carriage house apartment, I called Sarah's cell phone. It went straight to voicemail. Sarah, honey, it's Grandma. I just heard about your engagement. Please call me. I'd love to talk to you about it. 3 days passed with no return call. Tried again, this time leaving a message about how all the women in our family had been married at Willow Creek, how I still had my mother's veil in preservation, how special it would be to continue the tradition. Another 3 days, no response. When I drove by the caretaker's cottage, Sarah's car wasn't there. I started checking bookings for the manor, something I could do remotely, and noticed something odd. There were no new bookings past June of the following year, though we typically booked 12 to 18 months in advance, and several existing bookings had been modified by an admin account I didn't recognize. It was time to get serious. I called my attorney Judith again and asked her to meet me at the manor. She was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s with a steel gray bob and a penchant for sensible shoes. We'd been friends since serving on the Historical Society board together 15 years earlier. Show me everything, she said when she arrived, setting her briefcase on my office desk. I pulled up the booking system, my bank statements, the property tax records, and the letter from Raymond's attorney. She took careful notes, her face growing more concerned with each document. Elaine, she said finally, I think they're preparing to push you out completely. This has all the hallmarks of an elder exploitation attempt. The words hit me like a physical blow. But they're my family, I whispered. Judith reached across the desk and squeezed my hand, which unfortunately makes it even more common. Let me do some digging. In the meantime, I want you to make some changes. Under her guidance, I spent the next week securing my position, changing all passwords to the booking system and financial accounts, installing security cameras at key points around the property, documenting every interaction with Raymond and Melissa, and trying repeatedly to contact Sarah. I hired Mark Sullivan, a retired police officer who now did private security, to do nightly patrols of the property just until things settled down, I told him, not wanting to go into detail about family drama. He nodded, understanding in his eyes. Got it, Mrs. Thompson. I've seen family business disputes before. On October 15, 2023, exactly 4 weeks after receiving Raymond's letter, I got my first direct contact from Sarah in months. A text message. Grandma, can we talk? Alone. My heart leaped with hope. We arranged to meet at a coffee shop in town rather than at Willow Creek. When she walked in, I barely recognized her. My vibrant granddaughter looked exhausted, with dark circles under her eyes and her clothes hanging loosely on her frame. She slid into the booth across from me, her eyes darting around nervously. "I don't have much time," she said. "Tyler thinks I'm at a dress fitting." I reached for her hand, but she pulled it back, keeping both hands wrapped around her coffee mug. "What's going on, Sarah? Talk to me." Her eyes welled with tears. "Everything's moving so fast. The wedding, Harvard for Tyler, Dad talking about selling the manor." My blood ran cold. Selling the manor isn't his to sell. Sarah looked down. "He says it will be. He and Mom have been talking to lawyers about having you declared." She couldn't finish the sentence. "Incompetent," I supplied. She nodded miserably. "They say it's for your own good, that managing the property is too much stress at your age, that you're getting confused about bookings." I thought about the mysterious admin account, the modified reservations. "They're sabotaging me, Sarah, creating problems so they can swoop in with a solution that involves taking everything I've worked for." She bit her lip, and I could see the conflict playing out across her face. "What about you?" I asked gently. "Is this wedding what you want?" A tear slipped down her cheek. "I don't know anymore. Tyler says we're perfect together. His parents have all these connections. Dad says it's the smart move for my future." Waited, giving her space to continue. "But sometimes," she whispered, "sometimes Tyler gets so angry when I talk about the manor or my dreams for it. He says it's just a rundown old place and I should be thinking bigger." Anger flared in my chest, but I kept my voice calm. "And what do you think?" She stared into her coffee. "I miss the old oak tree. I miss helping you with weddings. I miss who I used to be." We talked for nearly an hour, until Sarah's phone buzzed repeatedly with texts from Tyler demanding to know where she was. Before she left, I held her shoulders gently. "Listen to me, Sarah. Whatever you decide about Tyler, about the wedding, about your future, it's your choice. Not your father's, not Tyler's, not even mine. And Willow Creek will always be here for you, one way or another. I promise you that." She hugged me then, a real hug like she used to give, and whispered, "I'm sorry, Grandma, for everything." As I watched her hurry out to where Tyler was waiting in his BMW, engine running, I made a decision. It was time to fight back, not just for the property, but for Sarah. The next day, I called in reinforcements. My youngest sister Jean flew in from Arizona, where she'd retired with her husband 5 years earlier. Jean had always been the fiery one between us, the one who'd marched for women's rights in the 70s and told off our handsy boss at the department store where we'd worked as teenagers. "I can't believe those ungrateful little," she fumed as I drove her from the airport. I cut her off with a sad smile. "They're still family, Jean. I want to protect what's mine, but I don't want to destroy relationships beyond repair." She snorted. "Seems to me like they're doing a fine job of that all by themselves." We spent the evening going through old photo albums, documented proof of 5 generations of women nurturing Willow Creek Manor, of Melissa growing up helping with weddings, of Sarah as a little girl proudly giving tours to brides. Following morning, Judith arrived with 2 colleagues, Ben Roberts, a forensic accountant, and Maria Diaz, who specialized in elder law. They spread papers across my dining table as Jean made coffee strong enough to strip paint. Ben whistled low as he reviewed the manor's financial records. "Mrs. Thompson, do you realize your son-in-law has been inquiring about commercial loans using the property as collateral?" I shook my head, stunned. "That's impossible. He doesn't own it." Ben pushed a document toward me. "No, but he's been representing himself as having your power of attorney. The banks have been requesting verification, which is probably why he's been pushing so hard to get legal control." Maria nodded grimly. "Classic elder exploitation pattern. Create confusion, isolate the elder from family and friends, then swoop in as the savior." Over the next 3 days, my team and I built a comprehensive defense strategy. Judith filed for a restraining order to prevent Raymond from representing himself as my agent in any capacity. Ben documented every suspicious financial inquiry and compiled a report showing the manor's actual value and healthy financial state, contrary to Raymond's claims that it was failing. Maria prepared documentation of my mental competency, including statements from my doctor, my accountant, and 3 long-term clients of the manor. And Jean, bless her, took over managing the property temporarily so I could focus on the legal battle ahead. She had a particular gleam in her eye as she corrected the errors in the booking system, personally calling each affected client to apologize for the confusion and offering a 10% discount for their trouble. On November 1st, 2023, everything changed. I was reviewing documents with Judith when my phone rang. Sarah's ringtone, the theme from Pride and Prejudice that we'd watched together countless times. I answered immediately. "Grandma," she sobbed, her voice barely coherent. I broke it off. "The engagement, Tyler." I gripped the phone tighter. "Where are you, sweetheart?" I could hear traffic in the background. "Walking, near Summerfield Park." He took my car keys. I was already grabbing my purse. "Stay there. I'm coming to get you." Judith nodded at me to go, gathering papers quickly. "I'll lock up. Go get your girl." I found Sarah sitting on a park bench, her makeup streaked down her face, clutching her phone like a lifeline. When she saw my car, she ran to it, practically falling into the passenger seat. Up close, I could see the red mark on her cheek that would likely become a bruise. "He hit you," I said, not a question but a statement. She nodded, fresh tears spilling. I told him I wanted to postpone the wedding, to take some time to think. He said I was embarrassing him, that his parents had already put deposits down on everything. When I said maybe we should call it off completely, she touched her cheek gingerly. Then he took my keys and said I could walk home and think about what I was throwing away. We drove in silence back to Willow Creek, bypassing the caretaker's cottage entirely. I took her to my apartment above the carriage house, made her tea in the kitchen where she'd helped me bake cookies as a child, and gave her a warm washcloth for her face. "I don't want to go home," she said quietly. "Dad's going to be furious." He had all these plans with Tyler's family, business connections. I sat beside her on the sofa. "You don't have to go anywhere you don't want to. You're 18. This is your home too, as much as it's mine." She looked around the cozy apartment, her eyes falling on photos of us together through the years. "Can I stay here tonight?" I hugged her gently, mindful of her bruised cheek. "You can stay as long as you need to." The fallout was immediate and explosive. Raymond showed up at the carriage house at 7 a.m. the next morning, pounding on the door hard enough to rattle the hinges. I opened it just enough to see him, keeping the security chain engaged. "Where is she?" he demanded, his face mottled with anger. "Sarah is resting," I said calmly. "She had a traumatic evening." He tried to push the door wider. "This is ridiculous. The Whitmans called me last night, absolutely livid. Do you have any idea what you've done? The connections we've lost?" I felt a surge of protective rage. "What I've done? Your daughter came to me with a bruise on her face after her fiancé hit her, and you're worried about connections?" His expression shifted, an ugly calculation visible in his eyes. "She's always been dramatic. Tyler said she was hysterical, making wild accusations. The boy's going to Harvard Medical School. For God's sake, he wouldn't jeopardize that by hitting a girl." The dismissive way he spoke, the automatic defense of Tyler over his own daughter, told me everything I needed to know. "Sarah will come home when she's ready," I said. "And Raymond, the next time you pound on my door like that, I'll call the police. Remember who owns this property." I closed the door on his stunned face, my hands shaking with a mixture of fear and determination. Behind me, Sarah stood at the top of the stairs, wearing one of my old robes. "Thank you," she whispered. I climbed the stairs and hugged her, both of us drawing strength from each other. Over the next few weeks, we established a new normal. Sarah stayed with me, sleeping in the small spare bedroom that had once been her playroom when she visited as a child. Jean extended her stay, moving into one of the Mana's guest rooms to keep an eye on things. Sarah filed a police report about the incident with Tyler, supported by photographs of her bruised cheek and a statement from the Uber driver who had witnessed Tyler's aggressive behavior when taking her keys. The Whitman family closed ranks around their son, of course, with Mrs. Whitman calling to tearfully accuse Sarah of ruining Tyler's life over a misunderstanding, and Melissa, my own daughter, remained conspicuously silent, not even calling to check on her child's welfare. By mid-November, Raymond escalated his tactics. First came the letter from the township claiming anonymous complaints about code violations at the manor, complaints that mysteriously disappeared when Mark Sullivan, my security guard who had connections on the local force, made some inquiries. Then came the negative online reviews for Willow Creek Manor, all posted within a 48-hour period from newly created accounts, citing problems that had never occurred. Sarah, showing her grandmother's spirit, countered by creating video tours of the property that we posted on social media, highlighting the manor's beauty and history. She even included testimonials from recent brides who were happy to support us. "Look at the date stamps," she told followers, pointing out the suspicious timing of the negative reviews. "Someone's trying to damage our business. I wonder who benefits if Willow Creek Manor fails." December brought the most direct attack yet, a formal petition filed by Raymond and Melissa seeking guardianship over me, citing declining cognitive abilities and vulnerability to undue influence. Their evidence: the fact that I had abruptly changed security procedures at the manor, inexplicably modified business operations, and impulsively taken in my adult granddaughter against her parents' wishes. Judith was livid when the papers were served. "This is a desperate move," she assured me. "They have no case. You've been evaluated by 2 separate doctors who found you completely competent. We have documentation of their attempts to manipulate the business, and Sarah is a legal adult who can live wherever she chooses." Still, the legal challenge was draining emotionally and financially. The court date was set for January 15, 2024, a date that loomed over the holiday season like a storm cloud. Christmas was a subdued affair. Sarah, Jean, and I decorated a small tree in the manor's front parlor, and Mark joined us for dinner with his wife Linda. We exchanged modest gifts and sang carols around the antique piano. Melissa called once, her voice stiff as she invited Sarah to stop by the cottage for gifts. "Mom and Dad said no drama," Sarah reported when she returned 2 hours later, clutching a gift card and a sweater. "They acted like nothing was wrong, like I was just visiting from college or something. Dad kept saying Tyler's family is still willing to work things out, if I'm reasonable." She curled up on the window seat overlooking the grounds, the same spot where she used to read books as a little girl. "I don't recognize them anymore, Grandma. It's like they care more about status and money than her." Voice trailed off. "Than you," I finished gently, sitting beside her. She nodded, tears brimming. "Then me, then you, then what our family has built here." I put my arm around her shoulders, feeling how thin she still was. "People show you who they really are in difficult times, Sarah. It's painful, but it's also valuable information." She leaned her head against my shoulder. "I keep thinking about the women in our family portrait gallery. Great-great-grandma Elizabeth, who held this place through the flu epidemic. Great-grandma Frances, who kept it during the Depression. Grandma Catherine, who transformed it into a wedding venue when people said a woman couldn't run a business like that." She straightened her shoulders slightly. "They wouldn't give up. So neither will we." January 15th arrived with a bitter cold snap, the kind of day where your breath freezes in the air and car engines protest being started. Sarah helped me dress in my most professional outfit, a navy suit I'd worn to countless business meetings over the years. Jean made us eat breakfast even though none of us had an appetite. "You need your strength," she insisted, setting plates of scrambled eggs before us. "Trust me, I've been through 3 divorces. Never face a judge on an empty stomach." That made Sarah smile for the first time that morning. I was grateful for my sister's ability to find humor even in our darkest moments. The courthouse was intimidating, all marble floors and echoing halls. We met Judith and Maria in the lobby, both impeccably dressed with briefcases full of documentation. "Remember," Maria coached as we waited, "answer only what is asked. Don't volunteer information. Stay calm no matter what their attorney claims." I nodded, though my stomach was in knots. I caught sight of Raymond and Melissa, entering with their lawyer, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit. Melissa wouldn't meet my eyes, but Raymond stared directly at me, his expression coldly confident. They had Judge Whitman's colleague presiding, a connection they'd made sure we knew about. The deck seemed stacked against us, but they had underestimated one thing: the power of documented truth. As the hearing progressed, Judith methodically dismantled their case. She presented my medical evaluations, statements from long-term business associates, and financial records showing the manor's stability under my management. Then came the counter-evidence, documentation of Raymond's unauthorized loan inquiries using the property as collateral, records of the tampered booking system traced to an IP address at the caretaker's cottage, and testimony from 3 couples whose weddings had been accidentally double-booked. creating the appearance of management problems. Your Honor, Judith concluded, this is not a case of an elderly woman needing protection. This is a transparent attempt to seize control of a valuable property through elder exploitation. The judge, despite his connection to the Whitmans, looked increasingly troubled as the evidence mounted. When it was Sarah's turn to speak as a witness, she walked to the stand with her head high, though I could see her hands trembling. She testified about the pressure to marry Tyler, about his controlling behavior and the incident that left her bruised, about her father's focus on connections with the Whitmans rather than her well-being. My grandmother has been the only one who asked what I wanted, she said, her voice gaining strength. She's more mentally sharp than anyone I know, and she's taught me everything about running Willow Creek Manor, which I plan to do myself one day, just like the women in my family have always done. By the time the hearing concluded, even Raymond looked deflated. The judge dismissed the guardianship petition, citing a complete lack of evidence regarding Mrs. Thompson's alleged incapacity and disturbing indications of potential financial exploitation. He went further, issuing a warning to Raymond about making false claims to financial institutions regarding power of attorney. As we gathered our things to leave, I caught Melissa looking at me with a complicated expression, anger certainly, but also something that might have been shame. For a moment, I thought she might come speak to me, but Raymond took her elbow and steered her away. We celebrated that evening with a small dinner at the Manor. Jean, Sarah, Judith, Maria, Ben, Mark and his wife Linda, and a few loyal employees who had stood by us through the turmoil. There was a sense of cautious victory in the air, though I warned everyone that this was likely just the first battle. Raymond doesn't give up easily when money is involved, I said as we gathered in the Manor's dining room. Jean raised her glass. Neither do Thompson women, she declared, and everyone cheered. Later, as the guests were leaving, Sarah found me standing on the veranda, looking out at the property glittering under a light dusting of snow. What happens now? She asked, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders against the cold. I took a deep breath of the winter air. Now we rebuild. The business, our lives, maybe even relationships eventually. She looked skeptical at the last part. I don't know if I can forgive them, Grandma. I put my arm around her. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or allowing people to hurt you again. It means not letting anger consume you. We'll see where time takes us. We stood in companionable silence, watching our breath cloud in the night air. I've been thinking, Sarah said finally. I want to apply to state for the business program, for fall semester. I could live here and commute, help with the Manor on weekends. My heart swelled with pride and relief. I think that sounds perfect. February and March passed in a blur of activity. Sarah enrolled in community college courses for the spring semester to get back on track academically. I focused on rebuilding the Manor's reputation, personally calling each couple who had experienced booking issues and offering special accommodations. Jean returned to Arizona but called daily for updates. Raymond and Melissa maintained a cold distance, though Sarah visited them occasionally, always briefly, always returning, emotionally drained. Mom asked about you, she reported after one such visit in late March. She wanted to know if you were still angry. I was folding linens for an upcoming wedding. As she spoke, what did you tell her? Sarah shrugged. I said you were too busy building back the business they tried to sabotage to spend much time being angry. April brought the first major wedding of the Sasuna local doctor and his fiancée, who had specifically sought out Willow Creek Manor despite the recent negative reviews. My mother was married here in 1992, the bride explained during her final walkthrough. She said Mrs. Thompson made everything magical then, and I know you'll do the same for us. It was exactly the vote of confidence we needed. The wedding went flawlessly, with Sarah handling the coordination like she'd been doing it her whole life. As we watched the couple dance their first dance on the lawn, near the old oak tree, I felt a sense of rightness settle over me. This was what we were meant to preserve, not just a property, but moments of joy, the creation of new family histories intertwined with our own. In early May, I received an unexpected visit from Melissa. She arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, looking nervous as she knocked on my carriage house door. Sarah was at class, and for a moment I considered not answering, but something in my daughter's posture, vulnerability I hadn't seen in years, made me open the door. Mom, she said simply, her voice catching. I didn't invite her in immediately, the memory of the guardianship hearing still fresh. What brings you here, Melissa, she fidgeted with her purse strap. I've been doing a lot of thinking. About Sarah, about you, about this place. She gestured vaguely toward the manor. I was wrong. We were wrong. And I'm sorry. I studied my daughter's face, looking for signs of manipulation, of Raymond's influence. Instead, I saw genuine regret in the eyes, so like my own. It's a start, I said finally, stepping back to let her enter. We sat awkwardly in my small living room, decades of shared history and recent pain stretching between us. Raymond and I are separating, she said abruptly. I filed the papers last week. I couldn't hide my surprise. What happened? She gave a bitter laugh. The Whitmans dropped him like a hot potato after the guardianship case fell apart. Suddenly, all those valuable connections weren't returning his calls. And when I found out he'd been using Sarah's college fund, the one you set up for her, to try to start a commercial development company, she shook her head. It was like waking up from a 20-year trance. We talked for nearly 2 hours, painful truths finally spoken aloud. How Raymond had gradually isolated her from me, how he'd painted my business decisions as erratic when they didn't align with his plans, how he'd convinced her that Sarah's future depended on connections with families like the Whitmans. He kept saying we were doing it all for Sarah, Melissa said, wiping tears, but when she was hurt, when she needed us most, he was more worried about the Whitmans' opinion than her bruised face. She looked around the apartment, at the photos of our family through the years. I don't expect forgiveness, Mom, but I want you to know I see things clearly now. When Sarah returned from class and found her mother there, the tension was palpable. They had their own healing to do, their own conversations to have without me present. I gave them privacy, walking the grounds of Willow Creek as the afternoon sun filtered through the oak tree's new spring leaves. Change was coming again to our family, as it had so many times before. Some relationships would be rebuilt, others permanently altered. The land would witness it all, as it had for generations. I thought of my mother's words again. The land knows who loves it. Through everything, the manor had remained, waiting for us to remember what really mattered. June arrived with a calendar full of weddings and a new sense of purpose. Sarah had officially moved into the caretaker's cottage alone, as Raymond had relocated to an apartment in town, and Melissa was staying with a friend while sorting out her next steps. We had established a proper business partnership, with Sarah handling social media and client communications while learning the financial aspects from me. The booking system was secure again, with proper safeguards in place. And on June 15, 2024, almost exactly 1 year after Sarah's graduation, we received the news that she'd been accepted to State University's business program for the fall. We celebrated with champagne in the manor's garden, toasting to new beginnings and old traditions carried forward. Which brings me to last Saturday night. Sarah and I had just finished coordinating a beautiful evening wedding, one of our most elaborate of the season. We were in the office, doing the final tallies, when my phone rang. Melissa, calling at 11 p.m. Mom, she said, her voice tight with an emotion I couldn't identify. I need to tell you something. Raymond is planning a wedding. I frowned, confused. For himself? He's still legally married to you. She gave a short laugh. Not his wedding. Tyler and his new fiancée, Madison, at Willow Creek Manor. Tomorrow. My blood ran cold. That's impossible. We have no wedding booked for tomorrow, and I certainly wouldn't have approved Tyler Whitman. Sarah looked up, alarmed by my expression. Apparently, Melissa continued, he told them you agreed months ago, as a personal favor to Judge Whitman, and that you'd conveniently forgotten to put it in the official system. I put the phone on speaker so Sarah could hear. He's supposed to arrive early to set everything up since you're getting too old to handle the details. The Whitmans have invited half the county. Madison's been posting about it online all week, her dream wedding at the historic Willow Creek Manor. Sarah's face had gone pale. But we have a site visit with new clients tomorrow at 2 p.m., the Fosters. Remember, they're considering booking for their anniversary party. I thought quickly, anger building. Where did you hear this, Melissa? She sighed. Raymond called asking if I'd seen your spare key set for the manor. Said he needed to get in early tomorrow to fix your mistake before everyone arrived. When I pressed him, he admitted what was happening. Mom, I think he's trying to embarrass you publicly. Make it look like you really are losing it, forgetting a high-profile booking. The audacity was breathtaking to use our venue without permission, to attempt to humiliate me in front of the community. to bring Tyler Whitman back to the place where his ex-fiancée now lived and worked, all to prove a point, to reassert control. What time is this supposed wedding? I asked, my mind already formulating a plan. 4 o'clock, Melissa replied. Judge Whitman is performing the ceremony himself. I looked at Sarah, whose initial shock was transforming into the same determined expression I'd seen in the mirror all my life. Thank you for telling us, Melissa, I said. We'll handle it from here. After hanging up, Sarah and I sat in silence for a moment. What are we going to do? She finally asked. I stood up, smoothing my skirt with hands that had managed this property through 5 decades of challenges. We're going to show them exactly who owns Willow Creek Manor, I replied. And it's not just about the property deed. We were up most of the night, making calls and preparations. Mark Sullivan agreed to provide security, bringing 2 colleagues from his days on the force. Judith promised to be on standby with legal documentation proving ownership and the right to refuse service. Jean booked the first flight from Arizona, determined not to miss what she called the showdown. By dawn, we had a solid plan not to create a scene, but to assert our rights firmly and professionally. We need to document everything, I told Sarah as we finally went to bed for a few hours of sleep. This ends today, one way or another. Sunday morning dawned bright and clear, perfect wedding weather. Ironically, by 10 a.m., Sarah and I were dressed in our professional attire, ready for both our legitimate appointment with the Fosters and whatever confrontation awaited us. At 10:30, Melissa arrived, hesitating at the edge of the property until Sarah waved her over. I'm here to help, she said simply. Whatever you need. It was the first time I'd seen my daughter and granddaughter truly aligned in months, and despite everything, it warmed my heart. Together, we checked all the building access points, ensuring nothing had been tampered with overnight. At 11:45, right on cue, a rental truck pulled into the long driveway. Raymond emerged from the driver's side, followed by Tyler Whitman himself and 2 men I didn't recognize carrying what appeared to be sound equipment. They froze when they spotted us standing on the manor's front steps, 3 generations of Thompson women, arms crossed, with Mark Sullivan and his colleagues positioned strategically nearby. Good morning, Raymond, I called, my voice carrying across the gravel drive. I understand there's been a misunderstanding about today's schedule. Raymond's face flushed, but he recovered quickly, plastering on the charming smile that had no doubt convinced many clients over the years. Elaine, we were just coming to help set up. I know you've been overwhelmed lately. He approached the steps, Tyler trailing behind with an uncomfortable expression. The Whitmans are so appreciative of you accommodating Tyler and Madison on short notice. I didn't budge from my position. That would be quite a feat, considering I never agreed to any such event. Willow Creek Manor has no wedding scheduled today, as our booking system clearly shows. I gestured toward Mark. Mr. Sullivan has documentation of all approved events, as well as security camera footage showing no preparatory visits or discussions about a Sunday wedding. Raymond's smile tightened. Now, Elaine, you know we discussed this. Back in February, Judge Whitman called you personally. He turned to Tyler. Tell her, Tyler, your father spoke with Mrs. Thompson directly. Tyler shifted uncomfortably. Unable to meet Sarah's eyes, that's what he told us. Said it was all arranged as a favor. I shook my head slowly. No such conversation ever occurred. And as you well know, Raymond, we require signed contracts and deposits for all events, something we don't have for this supposed wedding. I stepped down one stair, my voice hardening. What we do have is an appointment with legitimate clients at 2 p.m., and a business to run that you have repeatedly tried to undermine. The workers from the truck were looking increasingly confused, clearly sensing they'd walked into a family dispute. Raymond tried one more angle, his voice taking on a concerned tone that made my skin crawl. Elaine, this is exactly what we were worried about with your memory issues. You're embarrassing yourself. Think of the Whitmans' guests already on their way. Sarah stepped forward then, her voice steady. My grandmother has perfect recall of every wedding booked this season. What she doesn't recall is any conversation with Judge Whitman because it never happened. She pulled out her tablet, opening our booking system. I'd be happy to show you our calendar, complete with user logs of who entered each event and when. Tyler finally spoke, directing his words to Raymond rather than to us. You said this was all arranged. that Mrs. Thompson had agreed months ago. The accusation in his tone was unmistakable. Raymond's facade began to crack. It was a miscommunication, but we're here now, and we have guests coming, so let's just make the best of it. He took a step toward the door. I have a key. We can sort out the paperwork later. Mark Sullivan moved forward then, his security uniform unmistakable. Sir, you do not have permission to enter this property for the purpose of holding an unauthorized event. The owners have made that clear. Raymond's face contorted with anger. Owners, I've managed this property for years while Elaine played at running weddings. Without me, this place would have gone under a decade ago. The naked hostility in his voice confirmed every suspicion we'd had. I felt Melissa stiffen beside me, hearing perhaps for the first time the true extent of her husband's contempt. The land knows who loves it. Raymond, I said quietly, quoting my mother. And it has never been you. I turned to the workers. Gentlemen, I'm afraid you've been misled. There is no authorized event here today. I suggest you contact whoever hired you for further instructions. For a moment, I thought Raymond might physically try to push past us, his hands clenched at his sides, his face flushed with humiliation and rage. But Mark and his colleagues moved subtly to form a more visible barrier, and the fight seemed to drain out of him. You'll regret this, he said, his voice low, when the Whitmans and their guests arrive to find the venue locked. When Madison's dream wedding is ruined, that will be on you, Elaine. Your reputation in this town will be finished. Met his gaze steadily. No, Raymond, the only reputation at stake today is yours, and Tyler's family's, for attempting to hold an event without a legal contract. I turned to Tyler. I suggest you start making calls immediately. Tyler paled, finally seeming to understand the situation. This is going to destroy Madison. She's been planning this for months. Sarah spoke then, her voice surprisingly gentle. Based on a lie you and your family were told, or chose to believe, that's not our responsibility to fix. She looked him directly in the eye. You should have learned by now that trying to control everything and everyone doesn't work out in the end. He had the grace to look ashamed as he pulled out his phone and walked back toward the truck, already dialing. Raymond made one last attempt, turning to Melissa. Are you really going to stand there with them? Against your own husband? Melissa took a deep breath, her shoulders straightening. Ex-husband, Raymond, yes, I am. Because they're right, and you know it. Something passed between them, the end of whatever lingering connection had survived their separation. Raymond finally turned and stalked back to the truck, shouting at the workers to pack up. As they pulled away down the driveway, the three of us remained on the steps, watching until they were out of sight. Well, Jean said, appearing from inside the manor where she'd been watching through the window, that was anticlimactic. I was hoping for a bit more drama after flying all this way. Sarah laughed, the tension breaking. Trust me, Aunt Jean, that was plenty dramatic for Willow Creek Manor. We still had our legitimate appointment with the Fosters to prepare for, and likely some damage control to do when the Whitmans' guests began arriving and found no wedding. But in that moment, standing together in the morning sunlight, I felt a profound sense of victory, not just over Raymond's schemes, but over the doubt and fear that had shadowed us for months. Melissa touched my arm hesitantly. Mom, I know it doesn't make up for everything, but I'm proud of how you handled that. How you've handled all of this. She glanced at Sarah, then back to me. You protected what matters, like you always have. I covered her hand with mine, feeling the weight of our complicated history and the tentative possibility of reconciliation. That's what Thompson women do, I said simply. We protect what matters, generation after generation. Sarah linked her arm through mine on the other side. And we remember who we are, even when others try to make us forget. As we walked back into Willow Creek Manor together, I thought about all the women who had stood in this doorway before me. Elizabeth, Frances, Catherine, my mother, each facing their own battles to preserve our legacy. They would have recognized this moment for what it was, not just a confrontation over a venue, but a reclaiming of our narrative, our rightful place. The manor had weathered another storm, and so had we. Different, perhaps, from the storms of previous generations, but requiring the same resilience, the same quiet determination. Later that afternoon, after the Fosters had booked their anniversary celebration and the last confused wedding guest had been politely redirected, Sarah found me in the garden beneath the old oak tree. You know what I keep thinking about? She asked, looking up at the ancient branches spreading above us. That saying you used this morning. The land knows who loves it. I never really understood what great-grandma meant by that until today. She reached out to touch the rough bark of the tree trunk. It's not just about legal ownership, is it? It's about who sees the soul of a place, who protects its history and its future. I smiled, feeling the evening breeze that had cooled countless summer weddings over the decades. Exactly. Willow Creek has always been more than property to our family. It's a living thing, with its own wisdom. I took her hand, this beautiful young woman who carried our legacy forward. That's what Raymond never understood, what the Whitmans couldn't see. They wanted to own it. We choose to belong to it, to be its caretakers. Sarah nodded, a peaceful certainty in her eyes that reminded me of my mother, of myself at her age. And that makes all the difference, she said softly. If you're listening to this story, maybe you have your own Willow Creek, not necessarily land or a business, but something precious that others have tried to take from you or convince you wasn't yours to protect. Something that knows who truly loves it. Trust that knowing. Stand your ground. Remember who you are, even when others try to make you forget. And if you know someone facing their own battle for what rightfully belongs to them, share this story. Sometimes we all need a reminder that we are stronger than we think, especially when we stand together across generations. I'm recording this from the front parlor of Willow Creek Manor, where we just booked our 100th event since that Sunday confrontation 6 months ago. Leave a comment telling me about what you're protecting, what matters most to you. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories from the manor. We have 5 generations worth to tell. And remember, in the words of my mother, the land knows who loves it. So do we all. Deep down, we just have to listen.